A single shared plate on a storm-stricken night set everything in motion, binding two strangers in a moment neither of them could forget. What began as an act of kindness soon unraveled into a whirlwind of shadows, ambition, and desire, where every glance carried a question and every silence hid a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. In a world ready to twist innocence into scandal, a fragile connection dared to defy judgment, stirring a secret that refused to remain buried. If you enjoy stories filled with emotion, tension, and unexpected turns, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your support brings us closer to reaching 1,000 subscribers and helps this community grow. Chicago had a way of swallowing hope on nights like this. Snow crashed against the airport windows with a fury that felt personal, as if the winter itself wanted to test every soul trapped inside O'Hare. Aria Carter pulled her coat tight around her body, the worn zipper protesting as she dragged it upward. She had not eaten since morning. Her pride had been louder than her hunger until now. But as the blizzard thickened and the hours stretched, the ache in her stomach became impossible to ignore. She had come to the airport because it was bright, warm, and anonymous. After being fired earlier that afternoon, she could not bear the idea of returning to her small studio apartment with its half-empty fridge and colder silence. Here, at least, there were voices and lights, and the illusion that life was moving forward. "Keep walking," she whispered to herself, lifting her chin as she passed a row of passengers wrapped in blankets. Her tote bag slipped from her shoulder, and she hitched it up again, pretending she knew exactly where she was heading. Her phone battery winked red. Her hope felt the same. She followed the hum of televisions and the low murmur of conversations until she turned a corner and saw it. A softly lit lounge, all warm gold tones and polished wood, a world apart from the freezing chaos outside. Without thinking, she stepped inside. The heat enveloped her like an embrace she had not earned. A sharp voice cut through her brief relief. "Miss, this area is for members only." Aria froze. A staff member glared at her as if she had committed a crime. People turned to look. Her face burned with humiliation as she fumbled for words. "I'm sorry, I did not realize. I was just looking for a charger." "You need to leave immediately," the woman insisted, crossing her arms with an air of superiority that squeezed Aria's lungs. Before Aria could retreat, another voice entered the space. Deeper, calmer, commanding without effort. "She is with me." The room shifted without a sound. Aria turned slowly, breath catching in her throat. Lincoln Halstead stood a few steps behind her, tall and composed, snowflakes melting on the shoulders of his charcoal coat. The infamous billionaire. The man tabloids called the Dubai Maharaja. His presence quieted the lounge, the way a closing curtain hushes a theatre. He walked toward her with an expression that was neither pity nor curiosity. It was something else, something steady and unexpectedly warm. "Come," he murmured, extending a subtle gesture toward a corner booth. "You look like you need a place to sit." Aria hesitated, her pride trembling. "You do not have to do this." "I know," he replied softly, "but I want to." There was no arrogance in his tone, only sincerity. Somehow, that disarmed her more than any display of wealth could have. They reached a small table half hidden behind frosted glass. The staff, now flustered and overly attentive, rushed to offer food, but the kitchen had nearly run out due to the storm. Only one plate remained, a modest dish of roasted chicken and vegetables. Aria immediately tried to refuse. "I cannot take your meal," she insisted, shaking her head. "You paid for it." Lincoln sat down across from her with quiet grace and gently slid the plate to the center. "Then we will share it." Her heart stuttered. "I cannot let you do that." He lifted his eyes to hers, hazel with a touch of green, and something in them softened. "Aria, you are freezing and exhausted. Please do not make hunger another battle tonight." His voice was gentle, but firm enough that her resistance crumbled. She nodded slowly, her fingers trembling as she pushed a lock of hair behind her ear. Lincoln cut the food in 2 equal portions and offered her the fork with a reverence that made her chest tighten. The first bite was warm enough to bring tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, but Lincoln noticed. He pretended not to, giving her the dignity she fought to keep. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat thick. "I do not know why you are being so kind." Lincoln stared at his portion for a moment, then lifted his gaze. "Because everyone deserves grace on a night like this." His words settled in her like a balm she did not expect. The storm outside roared against the windows, but within their small circle of light, everything felt strangely still. The warmth between them was quiet, unforced, and dangerously close to tender. They spoke in soft tones. Arya told him a little about her day, careful not to reveal too much. Lincoln listened with genuine interest, his expression tightening when she mentioned losing her job. He offered no empty sympathy, only presence, and somehow that was more comforting. At one moment their hands brushed as they reached for the plate at the same time. The contact was brief but electric, a subtle spark that passed between them like a secret neither dared acknowledge. Arya withdrew her hand, cheeks flushing. Lincoln lowered his gaze, a slight smile touching the corner of his mouth. Outside their booth, the world continued to move, unaware of the fragile intimacy unfolding at the table. A pair of travelers walked by, one of them lifting a phone to record the unexpected scene of a billionaire sharing dinner with a woman who looked as though life had pushed her too far. Arya did not notice. Lincoln did, but he said nothing. His focus remained on her, on the way her eyes softened whenever she let her guard down. "You do not need to keep pretending you are fine," he murmured gently. Arya's breath hitched. "If I stop pretending, I might fall apart." Lincoln leaned forward, his voice just above a whisper. "Then let yourself be human. I will not judge you." Emotions swelled in her chest, warm and frightening. She did not understand why this stranger could see her so clearly, but in that moment she felt less alone than she had in months. As the last bite disappeared and the lounge began preparing to close for the night, Arya rose from the booth reluctantly. Her limbs felt heavier, though her heart fluttered with unfamiliar lightness. "Thank you," she said again, meeting his eyes. "Not just for the food, for treating me as if I mattered." Lincoln's gaze deepened, his voice low. "You do matter, Arya." Before she could speak, murmurs rose around them, quiet but unmistakable. People were staring. Someone pointed. Someone whispered, "That is him, and that is her." Confusion flickered in Arya's eyes, but Lincoln's jaw tightened. He glanced at his phone as messages lit up the screen one after another. Something had changed. Something had begun. "Come with me," he said softly, but with a tone that left no room for argument. "It is not safe for you out here." Arya felt a tremor of fear she could not explain. She nodded without understanding why, letting him guide her through the crowded lounge as snow hammered the windows with relentless force. Behind them, a traveler lowered his phone after reviewing the video he had just uploaded. The image froze on Arya's shy smile and Lincoln's quietly protective gaze. By the time they reached the terminal doors, people were already turning their heads to look at her. Her name had not yet become a headline, but the storm had begun. The moment Lincoln guided Arya out of the lounge, the airport transformed. It no longer felt like a place of weary travelers and delayed flights. It felt like a stage where spotlights had been turned toward her without warning. Every gaze seemed sharper, every whisper strangely amplified. Arya clutched her tote bag against her chest as if it were a fragile shield, trying not to stumble under the weight of invisible eyes. A knot of fear coiled in her stomach, twisting with each step. Lincoln noticed. He slowed his pace, adjusting it instinctively to match hers. "Stay close to me," he murmured, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "I will not let anything happen to you." Something in his tone soothed her, even as fear flickered beneath her ribs. She nodded without speaking, trusting him in a way that should have frightened her more than the stairs did. The blizzard outside had worsened. Snow hit the glass doors with such force it sounded like a relentless drum. Lincoln's driver had barely managed to pull the SUV close to the entrance. Dante Rivas, the head of Lincoln's security detail, opened the rear door, his breath visible in the frozen air. "Mr. Halstead," Dante said with professional calm, "we need to leave now. Visibility is dropping fast." Lincoln nodded and turned to Arya. "Get in. You will be warm inside." Arya hesitated for a heartbeat, feeling the pull of conflicting instincts. Part of her wanted to run from all of this, find a corner of the airport, curl into herself, and pretend none of this was real. But the storm was unforgiving, and the way people looked at her in the lounge had made something painfully clear. She could not stay there alone. She stepped into the SUV. The moment the door closed behind her, the world outside dimmed into a muffled roar of wind and snow. The interior was warm, soft, spacious. She exhaled shakily. Lincoln settled beside her. The scent of his wool coat carried faint notes of cedar and something darker, something refined. Their shoulders were close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Arya swallowed. "I do not know." His eyes softened. "That is an honest answer." For a moment they simply looked at one another, the tension between them quieter now, deeper. Dante and the driver spoke in hushed tones in the front, but Arya barely heard them. Her body was exhausted, her mind overwhelmed, her hunger dulled by the warmth of the shared meal. But her senses were aware of him, painfully aware. The SUV pulled away from the airport, moving slowly through the nearly white streets. Chicago looked like a city sculpted from frost and silence. Streetlights cast halos of gold through swirling snow. Arya pressed her forehead lightly to the window, watching the blurred scenery with a strange mixture of awe and dread. Lincoln watched her. "You said earlier you were looking for a charger," he said quietly. "Your phone battery must be close to dead." She gave a small nod. "It is, but it does not matter. I cannot imagine who I would call right now." "Still," he said, reaching into his coat, "it is better if you are not completely cut off." He handed her a sleek portable charger, the kind that probably cost more than her rent. She held it carefully, almost reverently. "I will return it to you," she promised. He shook his head. "Keep it. I can get another at any time." The generosity unsettled her. "Lincoln, I do not want to be one more problem you have to solve." "You are not a problem, Arya," he replied, his voice low, warm. "You are a person who has had a very difficult night." Her breath caught. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time, not with such gentleness. The SUV slowed as it approached a tall building of glass and steel that gleamed even in the storm. Dante exited first, scanning the surroundings before opening the rear door. The wind hit Arya like a blow, cold and unrelenting, and she stumbled slightly as she stepped out. Lincoln's hand reached for her immediately, his fingers wrapping around hers with protective steadiness. She looked down at their joined hands, the contrast between their skin tones and the warmth of his touch startling her. Her pulse fluttered. She did not pull away. Inside, the lobby was a sanctuary of soft lighting and polished marble. The security guards greeted Lincoln with quiet respect, their gazes flickering curiously toward Arya, but never lingering long enough to embarrass her. The elevator doors slid open with a gentle chime. Arya stepped in, her movements tentative. Lincoln entered beside her. The doors closed, enclosing them in a serene hush as the elevator began to rise. "I do not belong here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lincoln turned toward her, his expression unreadable at first, then achingly sincere. "Tonight, you belong wherever you are safe." Her eyes stung, not with tears, but with something she could not name, something that felt dangerously close to hope. When the elevator opened, Arya stepped into the penthouse and felt her breath leave her body. The space was vast, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed the snow-choked city below. Soft lights reflected off glass surfaces, creating a glow that felt both luxurious and strangely intimate. "This is your home?" she asked, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "Yes," Lincoln said, "or at least the place I sleep." The distinction lingered in the air like a confession. Arya took another step forward, then stopped, suddenly self-conscious. Her boots were wet, her coat worn, her hair disheveled. All of it felt painfully out of place in a space so immaculate. Lincoln noticed her discomfort. Without saying a word, he helped her out of her coat and hung it carefully near the entrance. His fingers brushed the sleeve near her hand, and that light contact sparked a warmth that spread through her chest. "You must be freezing," he murmured. "Come, I will get you something warm to wear." He returned with a soft, cream-colored sweater and matching lounge pants, folded neatly. "They may be a bit large," he said, "but they are warm." Arya touched the fabric, her fingertips sinking into the softness. "They are beautiful. Thank you." "There is a guest room down the hall," he said, gesturing gently. "You can change there. Take your time." Arya nodded and walked toward the room, each step feeling strangely unreal. The guest room was cozy, with warm lighting and a neatly made bed. She changed quickly, her cold skin drinking in the warmth of the fabric. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked safe, and that terrified her. She opened the door and found Lincoln waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. His gaze lifted to her, slowly, carefully. The admiration there was unmistakable, though he hid it well beneath his composed exterior. "They fit you better than I expected," he said softly. Arya felt heat rise to her cheeks. "They are very comfortable." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "I thought you might want something warm to drink." In the kitchen, the light was dimmer, creating a gentler atmosphere. Lincoln filled a mug with hot chamomile tea, steam rising in delicate curls. He handed it to her with quiet reverence, his fingers grazing hers. The touch was brief, but it lingered, leaving a faint tremor in Arya's breath. "Thank you," she murmured. "You are welcome." He watched her for a moment, then spoke with unexpected vulnerability. "I did not mean to frighten you earlier." "You did not," she said truthfully. "Everything frightened me tonight, except you." Those words hung between them, fragile and shimmering. Lincoln's voice lowered. "Arya, if anything makes you uncomfortable here, you tell me. I will respect your boundaries." The sincerity in his tone tightened her throat. "You have been nothing but respectful." He stepped a fraction closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him. "You had a terrible night," he said, "yet you still carry yourself with such dignity. It humbles me." Her breath shook. "I did not know billionaires could feel humbled." "I did not know I could either," he replied, a faint smile curving his lips. "But you surprise me." Arya looked into his eyes, and for a heartbeat she forgot the storm, the airport, the fear. All she saw was a man whose gaze held admiration, gentleness, and a restraint that felt devastatingly intimate. "Lincoln," she whispered, though she did not know what she meant to say. He reached out as if drawn by something he could not fight, then stopped, his fingers suspended inches from her cheek. The hesitation was more romantic than any touch could have been. "I should let you rest," he murmured, his voice hushed with emotion he did not dare release. "You have been through enough for one night." Arya nodded, though part of her wished he would stay a moment longer. "Thank you for everything." He held her gaze, his expression softening into something unmistakably tender. "Good night, Arya." "Good night, Lincoln." She walked down the hallway toward the guest room, feeling the weight of his gaze lingering on her back. When she closed the door behind her, she pressed her hand against her racing heart. Outside the windows, the storm raged on. Inside, something softer had begun to take shape, delicate yet undeniable. Morning arrived slowly, as if the storm itself hesitated to release its grip on Chicago. A muted glow seeped through the tall windows of the penthouse, softening the edges of the world outside. Arya woke wrapped in warmth she had not felt in days, the cream-colored sweater enveloping her like a quiet promise of safety. For a moment, she simply lay there, listening to the hush of central heating and the distant hum of wind. It felt unreal, as if she had slipped into another woman's life overnight. A woman who was not running from hunger or humiliation. A woman who did not have to brace herself against each new day, but the illusion cracked as soon as she sat up. Her mind rushed back with dizzying force. The airport, the stairs, Lincoln's hand around hers, the sanctuary of this place. Her stomach tightened. She was a guest, not a resident, and guests could not stay forever. She rose from the bed and went to the window. Snow fell in thick flakes, drifting downward like fragile feathers. The city below was a blur of white and muted lights. She watched the scene with a mix of awe and dread, unsure where she fit in this new landscape. Her fingers lingered on the sweater's sleeve. Lincoln had given her kindness without asking anything in return. But she knew how the world worked. Nothing stayed simple for long. She combed her hair with her fingers, washed her face, and took a slow breath before stepping into the hallway. The penthouse felt impossibly quiet, its polished surfaces reflecting the soft morning light. As she walked toward the kitchen, she heard low voices, tense and clipped. She paused at the corner, the sound of Lincoln's voice grounding her. "No, Marlene, that is not happening," he said, frustration edging his usually controlled tone. "You do not speak to her. Not now." Arya froze. Another voice followed, brisk and efficient. It had the metallic precision of someone who lived in conference rooms. "Lincoln, you are not hearing me," Marlene Voss replied. "The situation is spiraling. The video is trending across several platforms. Journalists are calling. Investors are already asking questions. This girl cannot stay with you." Arya felt heat rise in her cheeks, as if she'd been caught eavesdropping on a confession not meant for her. She almost stepped away, but another voice entered the conversation. "You need to think clearly," Graham Klein added. "Damage control must be immediate. The simplest path is compensation and a non-disclosure agreement. She disappears quietly. The narrative dies." Arya's breath caught. Her fingers curled into the fabric of the sweater. So that was it. That was the solution people like Lincoln were expected to choose. Remove the problem, clean the edges, preserve the empire. She stepped forward before she lost courage. Her voice came out steady, even though her heart hammered in her chest. "If you want me to leave, I will." Lincoln turned sharply, the tension in his shoulders shifting the moment he saw her. He looked as though the breath had been pulled from his lungs. His hazel eyes darkened with something that resembled anger, but not at her. "Arya," he said softly, "that is not what this conversation is." "That is exactly what this conversation is," Marlene corrected, her expression cool but not cruel. She studied Arya with calculating eyes, the way someone might evaluate a delicate object. "Miss Carter, this is not personal. It is simply necessary." Arya lifted her chin. "I do not want your money, and I do not want your papers," Marlene blinked, surprised. Graham cleared his throat. Lincoln's jaw tightened. "I did not agree to anything," Arya continued, refusing to let her voice waver. "I did not ask to be filmed. I did not ask to be dragged into whatever world this is. But I will not be bought. Not last night. Not now." Lincoln looked at her with something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. "Arya, no one is buying you. No one will ever speak to you that way while I am here." Marlene stepped forward. "Lincoln, you cannot let emotions dictate your—" "Enough," he said, the steel in his voice silencing the room. "I will handle this." Marlene pressed her lips together but said nothing further. Graham adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable, but also aware that Lincoln had spoken with finality. Lincoln turned to Arya, his expression softening. "Can we talk?" She nodded, though she felt unsteady, as if the floor beneath her shifted with each passing second. He gestured toward a quiet corner of the living room, where sunlight glowed across a rug of soft grey wool. When they were alone, Lincoln exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath since dawn. "I am sorry," he said. "None of this should have reached you." Arya shook her head. "Lincoln, I understand. You have a public life. People expect you to protect it." "Arya?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had not seen from him until now. It made him look younger, less controlled, achingly human. "What they suggested is not acceptable. You are not an inconvenience to be removed." "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." The words cut through her defenses like a warm breeze through frost. She swallowed, unable to speak for a moment. Lincoln's voice gentled. "Last night, the moment you stepped into that lounge, everything shifted. That had nothing to do with cameras or optics. It was human, and I will not allow anyone to turn you into a transaction." Her breath shook. "Then what happens now?" "That depends on you," he said quietly. "But I do not want you to leave while you are afraid, and I do not want you alone." The sincerity in his tone touched a place in her heart she had tried to fortify for years. Before Arya could respond, her phone chimed. She reached for it and felt her heart stop. The message displayed her full apartment address. Her hands trembled violently. "Lincoln!" He stepped closer, his presence immediately steadying her. "What is it?" She handed him the phone. His expression darkened, his eyes sharpening with a protective fury she had not yet seen. "You are not going back there," he said with quiet conviction. "Not today." Her voice cracked. "Someone found me, Lincoln." "I know," he said, lowering the phone, "and they will not get near you." As if summoned, Dante appeared at the edge of the room. "Mr. Halstead, I have already increased security at the entrance. We will run a trace on the number that sent the message." Arya wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the panic rise. Lincoln stepped closer, leaving only a breath of space between them. "Look at me," he said gently. She lifted her gaze. His hazel eyes were steady, warm, unwavering. "You are safe here," he murmured. "I promise you that." Her throat tightened, emotion catching like a knot. "Why are you doing all this for me?" For a moment he said nothing. Then he spoke in a voice that trembled with the kind of vulnerability he rarely showed. "Because something in me would not rest if I let you face this alone." The room felt smaller suddenly, the world reduced to the space between their hearts. Arya felt her pulse flutter, her breath thinning. Lincoln reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step away. She did not. He brushed his fingertips against her arm, feather-light. A touch filled with caution, care, and a tenderness that stole her breath. "Arya," he whispered, "do not mistake my concern for obligation. I am here because I want to be, not because I owe anyone anything." Her pulse quickened. "I do not know how to handle this," she admitted. "You do not need to," he replied. "We will figure it out together." The promise in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold outside. But just as the air between them thickened with emotion, Marlene reappeared, holding a tablet. Her face was pale. "Lincoln," she said quietly, "the clip has reached a major outlet. They are naming her." Arya's heart thudded painfully. Lincoln straightened, protective instincts settling over him like armor. "Then we respond on our terms," he said. Marlene hesitated, measuring her words. "There is a way to shield her, but it requires proximity. Public proximity." Arya frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Lincoln said, turning back to her with a mixture of apology and determination, "that people are going to talk about you regardless. So if you are willing, we can control the narrative." Arya tried to steady her breath. "And what would that narrative be?" Lincoln held her gaze, his eyes warm and intense. "That I am choosing to stand beside you." Arya's heart fluttered painfully. "And what would that require of me?" "Only your honesty," Lincoln whispered, "and your presence. Nothing more." Emotions collided inside her: fear, longing, uncertainty, hope. She searched his face, finding something real there, something sincere. "You would do that?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, his voice warm as a promise. "For you, I would." She felt her defenses crumble gently, like snow melting under the first touch of sunlight. "Then I will not run," she said, her words quiet but firm. "Not from this, not from you." Lincoln drew a breath, relief softening the tension in his shoulders. A slow, fragile smile touched his lips. "Thank you," he murmured. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. Lincoln lifted his hand again, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His touch was tender, almost reverent, filled with emotion he did not dare name. "Arya," he said softly, "whatever comes next, you are not alone." Her breath trembled. "Neither are you." He held her gaze a heartbeat longer, full of warmth and unspoken longing, before stepping back with visible restraint. Outside, the storm continued to howl. Inside, something far stronger began to take root. The day darkened early, swallowed by a winter sky that carried the weight of unspoken truths. Arya stood near the window of the penthouse, watching snow fall in slow spirals, as though time itself had decided to drift gently for a moment. The city was quiet, wrapped in white, and yet her heart beat with a nervous rhythm she could not calm. Lincoln had stepped out for a brief meeting, promising he would not be gone long. Arya believed him, but the silence he left behind was vast. She walked through the living room, fingertips grazing the back of the sofa, the edge of a table, the cool surface of a glass sculpture she did not dare move. Everything here felt curated, elegant, expensive, and undeniably foreign to her. She did not belong in a world polished to perfection, yet she found herself captivated by it. Not because of the luxury, but because of the traces of Lincoln she sensed in every corner. His restraint, his solitude, his discipline, his loneliness. She wandered down the hallway, intending only to stretch her legs, but something caught her eye. A sliver of light spilled from a door that was not fully closed. It was faint, golden, almost shy. She hesitated, reminding herself that this was not her home. Curiosity tugged at her anyway, gentle but persistent. Arya approached the door, her breath held without realizing it. She placed her hand against the smooth wood, listening. No sound came from inside. The storm outside whispered against the glass windows, but within the penthouse there was only stillness. She pushed the door open an inch. Her heart stumbled. The room was nothing like the rest of the penthouse. It was not polished. It was not curated. It was lived in, pulsing with purpose. Walls lined with bulletin boards, covered in printed reports, photographs, color-coded strings connecting events she did not understand. A large desk, cluttered with files, markers, maps, and notebooks. screens displaying spreadsheets and graphs. A small lamp cast warm light across a table stacked with documents, the topmost pages filled with handwritten notes in Lincoln's sharp, deliberate handwriting. This was a room of obsession, a room of secrets, a room Lincoln had never intended for her to see. Arya stepped inside before she could convince herself not to. The air felt different here, charged with something she could not identify. She approached the desk slowly, drawn to it the way a moth drifts toward light. A photograph rested near the edge, printed in muted tones. It showed a landscape she did not recognize. Beneath it, a typed line mentioned an incident and a date. Her stomach tightened. This had nothing to do with her, and yet everything in the room pulled her deeper. She leaned closer, skimming the margins of documents she did not dare touch. Words like oversight, liability, negligence, and investigation appeared again and again. Some lines were underlined fiercely, others circled twice. She lifted her gaze to the wall, where colored strings connected photographs to timelines, arrows pointing from one event to another. It felt like walking into the heart of someone's hidden war. Lincoln's war. A soft click behind her made her turn sharply. Lincoln stood in the doorway. The lamplight brushed against his face, highlighting shock first, then something darker, something like vulnerability. His coat was still on, snow melting into tiny droplets on his shoulders, forgotten entirely as he stared at her. Arya. Her name left his lips with a weight she felt in every bone. "I am sorry," she said quickly, stepping back. The door was open. "I did not mean to intrude." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a slow, deliberate motion. The room seemed to shrink, drawing the two of them into a space where truth had nowhere to hide. "You should not blame yourself," he said softly. "I should have locked it." Arya swallowed hard. "Is this work?" A long silence followed. Lincoln looked at the wall behind her, at the pieces of a story he had been trying to assemble alone. Then he looked back at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "It is more than work," he said. Arya waited, her heart pounded with fear and something else, an aching desire to understand him. Lincoln walked past her, stopped near the desk, and rested his hand on the edge of a stack of papers. He drew in a slow breath, as though deciding how much of himself to reveal. "I have not shown this room to anyone," he said quietly. "Not my board, not my advisors, no one." The confession washed over her like warm light. "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Because vulnerability is dangerous in my world," he replied, "and this room is all the places where I am vulnerable." Arya moved closer, compelled by the emotion in his voice. "What is all this, Lincoln?" He lifted a document, letting her see the headline. Her breath hitched. "This is about the incident they are accusing you of," she murmured. "Yes." His voice dropped, weighted by something sorrowful. "The official story is a lie, or rather, a carefully crafted version of the truth." Arya's eyes met his. Then what really happened? He let the document fall back onto the desk and pressed both hands against the surface, as though grounding himself. "A community overseas suffered a terrible loss," he said softly, "and my company was blamed. It became the narrative that served the right people at the right moment." "But you believe someone else caused it," she said, piecing together the fragments she had glimpsed in the room. "I do not believe it," Lincoln corrected. "I know it. Someone manipulated reports, buried warnings, falsified timelines. And if I do not prove the truth, innocent people will carry the blame forever." Arya felt her heart ache at the quiet anguish in his voice. She took another step closer, until she was near enough to see the tension in his shoulders. "Lincoln," she whispered, "you should not carry this alone." He turned to her slowly, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and resolve. "There is no one else I can give this to." Arya reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his forearm. The touch was gentle, tentative, yet powerful enough to make him close his eyes. "You have me now," she said softly. "At least for this moment, you do not have to pretend to be invincible." Lincoln opened his eyes, and the look he gave her was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was gratitude, pain, longing, and something deeper she did not dare name. "Arya," he murmured, her name a breath on his lips. "You do not understand how dangerous it is for you to see this room." "Then tell me," she whispered, refusing to retreat. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until she felt his breath against her forehead. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fleeting second before he forced himself to look away. "I do not want danger touching you," he said, voice low and trembling with restraint. "You have been through enough." She lifted her hand and placed it lightly against his chest. His breath hitched as her touch settled over his heart. "I am not afraid of truth," she said, "and I am not afraid of you." His hand rose slowly, his fingertips brushing her cheek with the gentleness of a man terrified of wanting too much. The warmth of his touch spread through her, making her lean into it despite the turmoil around them. "You should be," he whispered, though there was no conviction behind the words, only longing. Arya shook her head. "No. I see you, Lincoln, not the man in the headlines, not the legend they shaped to fit their stories. I see the man who shared his meal with a stranger, the man who gave her warmth, the man who promised she would not be alone." Emotion flickered across his face like a fragile flame. His hand cupped her cheek fully now, his thumb brushing the corner of her lip with devastating tenderness. "You have no idea how much it means to hear that," he said, his voice roughened with sincerity. The air between them thickened, soft and charged. Arya felt drawn to him with a force she could neither explain nor resist. Lincoln leaned toward her, eyes searching hers for permission he did not voice. But instead of closing the distance, he exhaled slowly and lowered his hand, stepping back with visible restraint. "I cannot lose control," he said quietly. Arya wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breath. "I did not ask you to." "I know," he replied, "but I feel things when I am near you, things I am not sure I can contain." Her heart fluttered painfully. "Lincoln." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "This room is a burden, a secret that has cost me sleep, time, and pieces of myself I cannot replace. I cannot ask you to carry even a fragment of it." "You did not ask," she whispered. "I walked in, and I should have closed the door." She stepped closer again, refusing to let distance build between them. "Lincoln, caring for someone is not a weakness." He turned to face her, his expression softening, his eyes warming despite his internal war. "Then what is it?" "It is strength," she said. "Strength to let someone in." Lincoln stared at her for a long moment, his breath deep and uneven. "I want to let you in," he admitted. "More than I should." Arya felt her chest tighten in a way that was both painful and beautiful. "Then let me be here," she whispered. "Just here, in this moment." Lincoln stepped toward her again, slower this time, as if drawn by an invisible thread. When he reached her, he lifted his hand and rested it gently against the back of her neck, his forehead lowering to hers with a tenderness that threatened to unravel her completely. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The room around them held its breath. Her eyes glistened. "Then let me stay. For tonight, let me stay." He nodded once, slow and deliberate, emotion tightening his jaw. "All right," he whispered. "Stay." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a way that felt both hesitant and inevitable. The warmth of his touch radiated through her, anchoring her to him. They stood together in the heart of his most guarded room, surrounded by shadows of his burdens, yet illuminated by a gentler truth neither of them had been ready for. Not desire, not fear, connection. And it was strong enough to silence the storm outside. Morning crept into the penthouse with a gentleness that belied the tension waiting to unfold. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows in soft ribbons, brushing over the marble floors and the quiet furniture, as though unaware of the storm gathering far beyond the glass. The city lay muffled under a blanket of snow, its edges softened by white, its frenzy slowed by cold. But inside Lincoln's home, a different kind of storm began to rise. Arya stood at the kitchen counter, warming her hands around a cup of tea Lincoln had made for her. She wore the cream sweater he had lent her, the fabric soft against her skin, comforting in a way she had not expected clothing to feel. Yet beneath that warmth, a heaviness settled in her chest that she could not ignore. She was still trying to understand the truth of the previous night. The revelation of Lincoln's secret room had changed something between them, something unspoken and powerful. She had seen pieces of a man who hid his pain behind discipline and elegance. And he had seen her see him. It created a fragile closeness, delicate as spun glass. Lincoln entered the room quietly, as though he had been standing at the threshold, deciding whether to step into this moment. His hair was slightly tousled from running his fingers through it, and the faint shadows under his eyes made him look achingly human. "Good morning," he said softly. Arya lifted her gaze to him. "Good morning." He approached the counter, moving with that distinct mixture of confidence and restraint that defined him. He poured himself coffee, his movements precise, but she noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. He was trying to appear calm. She felt it instantly. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Lincoln paused, his fingers curling around the mug. "Not entirely," he admitted, his gaze drifting to the snow outside. "There is something I need to tell you." Before he could continue, the sound of urgent footsteps echoed from the hallway. Marlene Voss entered the kitchen with a tablet in hand, her expression tight. "Lincoln," she said, voice clipped, "we have a problem." Lincoln's jaw tightened. "Marlene, this is not a good time." "It cannot wait," she insisted. Arya's stomach dropped. Marlene turned the tablet toward Lincoln. A headline glared across the screen in bold letters. "Billionaire Lincoln Halstead caught in secret airport dinner with mystery woman." Below it, a blurred image of Arya and Lincoln sharing the airport meal. The caption twisted the moment into something salacious, something fabricated. Arya felt her breath leave her. Lincoln took the tablet, scrolling slowly, his face growing darker by the second. Marlene continued, her voice urgent, but not unkind. "They have identified her, Lincoln. They know her name. They know where she worked. They have pulled old photos from her social media. They are making assumptions about her, dangerous assumptions." Arya wrapped her arms around herself, dread chilling her to the bone. "What assumptions?" Marlene hesitated only a moment. "That this was staged. That you paid her. That she is involved with you for money. That she leaked the story herself." Arya pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the wave of humiliation. Lincoln tossed the tablet on the counter with a sharp exhale. "That is enough," he said firmly. "Marlene, leave us." But she stood her ground. "Lincoln, they are preparing a full segment. News networks want statements. Her address has been posted anonymously on several forums. This situation is escalating." Arya's pulse throbbed in her ears. The world outside was no longer distant. It was here. It was invading. Lincoln turned to her immediately, his voice softening. "Arya, I am so sorry. I never wanted this for you." She shook her head in disbelief. "They think I did this for attention, that I used you." "You did nothing wrong," he said, taking a step closer. Marlene cleared her throat. "There is still a way to contain the damage." Lincoln shot her a warning look. Arya swallowed, bracing herself. "Tell me." Marlene hesitated, then spoke as gently as her businesslike tone allowed. "You allow us to release a statement. You say the encounter was coincidental. You distance yourself from him publicly. You step out of the picture." Arya felt her heart shrivel. "In other words, I disappear." Marlene nodded slowly. "For your own safety, and for his." Lincoln clenched his jaw. "She is not disappearing." Marlene held his gaze with surprising courage. "Lincoln, be rational." "I am," he said. "For once, I am entirely rational." He turned to Arya again, and the emotion in his eyes made the room feel smaller, warmer, more fragile. "You do not have to agree to any of this." Arya's breath trembled. "But if I stay, the lies will keep spreading." Lincoln approached her slowly as though afraid she might step back. "Then let them spread. I will protect you from every single one of them." She felt her throat tighten painfully. The way he said those words, his voice rich with conviction, did something to her heart, something irreversible. Marlene sighed. "Then there is only one other option." "Enough," Lincoln snapped. "You said what you came to say." She hesitated, then gave Arya a sympathetic look before leaving the room. Silence settled around them, heavy and charged. Arya stared at her hands. "I did not want attention. I did not want any of this." Lincoln closed the distance between them, his gaze searching hers. "I know, and I will fix it." "You cannot fix the entire internet," she whispered. "No," he admitted softly, "but I can do something far better. I can stand beside you." Arya's eyes lifted to his, wide with disbelief. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, voice steady as a vow, "that if the world insists on twisting our story, then we will tell it ourselves. On our terms." She felt her breath catch. "Lincoln, if you do that, people will assume things about us." He held her gaze with raw honesty. "Let them assume." Her heart thudded hard enough to be heard. She stepped closer, unable to resist the magnetic pull between them. "Why would you risk your reputation for me?" His voice lowered to a whisper. "Because I cannot stand the thought of you facing this alone, and because the truth is—" He exhaled shakily. "You matter to me more than I know how to admit." Arya felt her knees weaken. She reached for the counter to steady herself, but Lincoln's hand found hers first. His fingers curled around hers with a gentle certainty that stole her breath. "Lincoln," she murmured, "you do not have to say things you will regret later." His jaw softened. "I have never regretted protecting someone who deserved better than the world gave them." Arya's eyes glistened. She did not cry often, but something in the tenderness of his words unraveled a knot inside her. He lifted his free hand and brushed a tear from her cheek before it could fall. The touch was achingly gentle, reverent. "Arya," he whispered, "you are stronger than you know, but even the strongest people deserve someone to stand with them." She closed her eyes briefly, leaning into his palm. His thumb grazed her cheekbone, sending a shiver down her spine. When she opened her eyes again, his face was close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. Their foreheads almost touched. The air thickened around them, heavy with longing, heavy with unspoken promises. "Lincoln," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me what you need," he murmured. She let her fingers trace the back of his hand, her touch feather-light but filled with yearning she could no longer conceal. "I need you not to let go." His breath hitched. "Then I will not." For a moment, they simply stood there, wrapped in the fragile stillness of a moment that felt too intimate to break. Arya's heart fluttered with terrified hope, her pulse thundering beneath her skin. Lincoln looked at her like she was something rare and precious, something he had not known he was missing until the moment he found her. Slowly, the world returned in muted fragments. The snow outside, the low hum of the building, the faint taste of tea on her lips. But the connection between them did not fade. Lincoln finally spoke, his voice warm and low. "There is something else you should know." Arya lifted her gaze, searching his expression. "What is it?" "I want to help you rebuild your life, not erase it, not silence it, not hide it." Her breath caught. Why? His answer was simple, honest, beautiful. "Because I want you in mine." Arya felt her heart open like a door she had kept locked for too long. She squeezed his hand gently, her voice soft but certain. "Then I will stay," she whispered. "I will face whatever comes next. With you." Emotion flashed in Lincoln's eyes, rich and warm. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her knuckles. The gesture felt old-fashioned, reverent, and devastatingly romantic. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin. Their eyes held. The space between them pulsed with energy, charged with the promise of something neither dared name aloud. Arya took a slow breath. "What do we do now?" Lincoln stepped closer, allowing their foreheads to touch at last. His voice, when he spoke, was soft as velvet. "We hold our ground. Together." Her heartbeat answered his, and in that moment, wrapped in his presence and the quiet power of his touch, Arya felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Not fragile, not fleeting, real. Evening descended over Chicago with a velvet heaviness, the kind that blurred the edges of buildings and softened the bite of winter into something hauntingly beautiful. Snow continued to fall in slow, measured flakes, coating the city in a glittering hush. But inside Lincoln Halstead's penthouse, the air carried a different kind of weight. Not cold, not silence, suspense. Arya stood near the wide windows overlooking the city, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared at the snow-covered skyline. Everything looked impossibly far away, as though the lights belonged to a world she no longer recognized. In only a handful of days, her life had shifted from quiet survival to bewildering scrutiny. Her name was on strangers' lips, her face on screens, her intentions dissected by people who had never met her, and she was still trying to understand the man whose shadow now sheltered her. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps, measured and unmistakable. Lincoln approached slowly, as though sensing the fragile thread of her thoughts and choosing not to break it. "Arya," he said gently, "you have been standing here for a long time." She exhaled, her breath fogging the glass. "I'm trying to make sense of everything." He stopped beside her, leaving only a breath of space between them. She felt his presence before she dared to look at him. The warmth radiating from him seemed to settle around her like a quiet offering. "Then let us try together," he murmured. Arya turned her head slightly. His hazel eyes caught the glow of the city lights, reflecting streaks of gold and amber that made him appear both powerful and heartbreakingly human. "Lincoln," she whispered, uncertain how to voice the swirling emotions inside her. "The world outside this place feels so loud, so overwhelming." His gaze softened. "And I know I am the reason for that noise." "You are not," she said at once. "People chose to twist something good into something ugly. That is not your fault." A shadow crossed his expression, a quiet gratitude mixed with longing. "Still, I cannot let that darkness touch you without fighting it." Her heart fluttered with a mixture of vulnerability and warmth. "I do not want you to fight alone." Lincoln's breath caught. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You are here, Arya. Your presence alone is a battle cry I never expected." The tenderness in his touch made her pulse stutter. She leaned slightly, not closer, but not away, a quiet surrender to the truth simmering between them. Before the moment could deepen, Dante entered the room with the silent grace of someone accustomed to tense conversations. His expression was serious. "Mr. Halstead," Dante said, "we traced the number Aria received earlier. The messages were rerouted through several mirrored servers. Whoever sent them knew what they were doing." Lincoln's jaw tightened. Aria felt a knot form in her stomach. "So, it was not random," she said. "No," Dante replied calmly. "It appears deliberate." Lincoln stepped closer to her, protective instinct simmering beneath his calm veneer. "Aria, whatever game they are playing, you are not playing it alone." Dante nodded respectfully and discreetly stepped back, giving them space. Lincoln turned toward her fully now. "We need to be careful. Whoever wants to intimidate you is calculating, and someone with that level of intention does not stop after one attempt." Aria swallowed, her voice trembling. "What should we do?" Lincoln's expression shifted into something focused, determined. "We set a trap," her breath faltered. "A trap?" "Yes," he said softly. "A controlled moment, a situation designed to reveal who is watching too closely." Aria stared at him, heart pounding. "How?" He moved closer, his hand brushing hers as though guiding her into trust. "By letting them think they are winning. By making a move that someone desperate to manipulate the narrative cannot resist." Aria felt a chill, not from fear, but from the gravity in his tone. Lincoln Halstead was a man accustomed to strategy, a man who understood power, control, and the delicate art of timing. But what unsettled her most was not his plan. It was the way he looked at her, as if she had become essential to it. "Tell me what you need me to do," she whispered. Lincoln held her gaze for a long, breathless moment. "Just stay by my side. Let the world see you with me." Her heart raced. "You think that will draw them out?" "I know it will." His voice was warm, intense. "Eyes already follow you because of me. If we appear together publicly, those who wanted to hurt you will reveal their next move." Aria felt her pulse flutter in her throat. The idea of standing next to him in front of cameras terrified her, but she wanted to help him. She wanted to protect him the way he had protected her. And she wanted, more than anything, to show him that she was not afraid of being seen with him. "Then I will do it," she said softly. "I will stand with you." Emotion flickered across his eyes, a blend of relief, pride, and something deeper he did not dare name. "Thank you," he whispered. He reached for her hand, enveloping it with his warmth. The quiet intimacy of the gesture sent a wave of emotion through her. She intertwined her fingers with his, allowing herself to feel the comfort of his touch. It was not a promise of forever, not a declaration of love, but something equally powerful: trust. Later that evening, Lincoln arranged a brief appearance in the lobby of the building, under the guise of picking up documents from his assistant. Aria understood the purpose. Cameras often lingered outside the entrance, waiting for glimpses of public figures. The moment she stepped into the elevator with him, her heart raced. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "Yes," she admitted, "but I am here." His thumb brushed gently against her hand. "I am proud of you." The doors opened into the elegant lobby, and the world swallowed them instantly. The flash of lights hit her first. A handful of photographers, tipped off by someone, were already there. "Lincoln Halstead! Lincoln! Who is she?" "Is this the woman from the airport? Are you in a relationship?" Aria froze for a heartbeat, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of attention, but Lincoln stepped closer, placing a hand on the small of her back. His touch was gentle yet firm enough to anchor her. "Look at me," he whispered, his breath warm at her temple. She lifted her gaze to him. "You are safe," he murmured. Something inside her steadied. Together, they walked forward. Lincoln held her close enough that the cameras captured a united front, yet not so close that the gesture felt forced. His presence was protective but never possessive. Her steps grew more confident, their bodies moving in quiet harmony. They reached the car. Dante guided them in swiftly. The door closed, muffling the chaos outside. Arya let out a breath she had been holding. "You did perfectly," Lincoln said, turning toward her with pride shining in his eyes. Arya smiled, shakily but genuinely. "I could not have done it without you." Lincoln's fingertips brushed the back of her hand. "You are stronger than you realize." Warmth bloomed in her chest. They returned to the penthouse a short while later, but an unease lingered in the air. Arya sensed it before she even stepped out of the elevator. Something felt off, as if silence itself had learned to listen. They entered the living room, where soft lights cast long shadows across the floor. Arya paused, searching the space for something out of place. Lincoln watched her closely, noticing her tension. "What is it?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I do not know. I just feel something." Lincoln stepped beside her, his voice low with concern. "You are safe here." She nodded, though uncertainty still fluttered in her chest. Dante appeared moments later, holding an envelope. "This was left downstairs," he said. Lincoln took it. A cold stillness entered the room as he opened it. The single sheet of paper inside bore only a short sentence. She should walk away. Before she becomes collateral damage. Arya felt her stomach drop. Collateral? Lincoln's expression darkened, protective instinct radiating from him like heat. He moved toward her, placing both hands on her upper arms, grounding her. "Do not be afraid," he whispered. "I will not let anyone harm you." Tears pricked her eyes. "Why are they doing this?" Lincoln lowered his forehead to hers, a gesture both intimate and deeply reassuring. "Because they think fear can make you disappear." His voice softened into something dangerous and tender. "They are wrong." Arya closed her eyes, leaning into him. His breath mingled with hers, warm and steady. His hands held her gently, yet with a quiet ferocity that told her he would fight until his last breath to protect her. Her voice trembled. "Lincoln, I am not afraid of them. I am afraid of losing this." He inhaled sharply, as if her words pierced through every layer of restraint he carried. "Arya," he murmured, "you will not lose me." She opened her eyes slowly, finding his gaze waiting for hers. Raw, unmasked, filled with longing he could no longer conceal. He lifted a hand, brushing his thumb across her cheek with a tenderness that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. "You have become someone I cannot imagine letting go of," he confessed softly. Her breath caught. "Lincoln." Their faces were inches apart, the air charged with emotion too powerful to ignore. She felt his breath warm against her lips, felt the tension that trembled through him as he fought to hold the moment still, not yet crossing the line, but not stepping away either. His fingertips grazed her jaw, lingering with reverence. "Arya," he whispered, "stay close to me tonight." Her heart answered before her voice could. "I will." He closed his eyes, exhaling as though her words were the only comfort he needed. When he opened them again, the storm outside seemed to pale beside the intensity in his gaze. Together, they stood in the glow of the dim lights, surrounded by danger, shadow, and uncertainty. But in that fragile, breathless space, they chose something stronger. Each other. Night fell over Chicago like a velvet curtain, thick and heavy with tension. Snow swirled under street lamps, dancing in erratic spirals that reflected the turmoil brewing inside Lincoln Halstead's penthouse. The city looked peaceful from above, glittering under winter's touch. But inside those tall walls, the air thrummed with fear, suspicion, and a truth that refused to remain buried. Arya sat curled on the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, her thoughts tangled like threads pulled too tightly. The envelope they had received earlier lay on the coffee table, its message burned into her mind. She should walk away, before she becomes collateral damage. The words replayed relentlessly, threatening, cold, meant to frighten her into running. But instead of pushing her away from Lincoln, they rooted her even more firmly beside him. Yet fear lingered, a quiet, gnawing fear, not for herself, but for the man who had shielded her when the world turned vicious. Lincoln stood across the room, tension radiating from him in waves. He was on a call, his voice clipped and quiet enough that she could not hear the words, only the controlled frustration beneath them. He wore a charcoal sweater that clung to the lines of his shoulders, his posture rigid, his jaw set in a way that made her chest ache. She could tell something was wrong, something deeper than threats or rumors. When he ended the call, he stayed still for a moment, his hand dragging over his face. He looked exhausted, wounded in a way he tried to hide. Arya rose slowly. Lincoln. He lifted his gaze to hers, and she saw it at once. This was not the tight composure he usually wore. This was raw, bare, vulnerable. "Everett called an emergency board session," he said quietly. "Tonight." Arya's stomach tightened. "And that is bad." Lincoln nodded once. "Very." She approached him slowly. "What are they planning?" He drew in a breath, steady but fractured at the edges. "They want to suspend my authority until the investigation into the overseas incident is finalized." Arya felt her heart drop. "Suspend you? Can they do that?" "If they push hard enough," Lincoln murmured, "and if they convince enough board members that I am too compromised by all of this." His eyes flicked to hers, guilt, fear, longing, all tangled in that small glance. "My presence," she whispered. "No." He stepped quickly toward her. "Do not say that. You are not the problem, their greed is. But you said they are using this against you." "Because they cannot touch the truth yet," he said tightly, "so they look for the weakest link in the chain they think surrounds me." Arya swallowed hard. "And you fear that is me?" Lincoln shook his head instantly. "No, I fear they will try to make you believe it is you." She exhaled, trembling. "Then what do we do?" "We go to that meeting," he said softly. "Together." Arya froze. "Together?" "Yes." He reached for her hand, his fingers grazing hers with quiet urgency. "I want them to see you by my side, to understand that I will not hide you to protect their comfort." Her breath caught. "Lincoln, if I go, will they not take it as proof that you are emotionally compromised?" His grip tightened gently. "I am emotionally compromised, Arya. I just will not let them weaponize it." Heat rushed through her, not embarrassment, but something deeper, something dangerously close to love. She whispered, "If you want me there, I am there." Lincoln's shoulders eased, his eyes softening with gratitude so profound it nearly brought tears to hers. He brushed his thumb against her knuckles, lingering in a moment too intimate to hide. "Thank you," he murmured. They prepared quickly. Arya changed into simple but elegant clothes, a black turtleneck, fitted slacks, and a soft coat Lincoln lent her, warm and sophisticated. She tied her hair back loosely, framing her face with strands the snow might catch. Lincoln watched her with a mixture of admiration and unspoken longing. "You look perfect." Arya felt her pulse quicken. "I am nervous." He stepped toward her slowly, as though drawn by the gravity between them. "Do you trust me?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." He lifted a hand, cupping her cheek with such gentleness it made her eyes flutter shut. His thumb traced the faintest line along her cheekbone before he let his forehead rest against hers. "Then stay close to me tonight," he whispered. "I will," she breathed. He lingered there a moment longer, his breath warm against her lips, the space between them charged with restrained emotion. Then he stepped back, because he had to, not because he wanted to. They left the penthouse with Dante escorting them. The board met in a conference room on the 34th floor, a space of glass walls, sharp lines, and colder hearts. As the elevator opened, whispers cut through the quiet hallway. Board members turned to stare, their expressions shifting with surprise, disapproval, and thinly veiled curiosity. Uriah felt the weight of their scrutiny pressed down on her, but Lincoln offered his hand subtly, palm open beside him. She laced her fingers with his, drawing strength from his touch. When they entered the room, Everett Shaw stood at the head of the table, his silver hair immaculate, his smile rehearsed and predatory. "Well," Everett said smoothly, "what a surprise. Miss Carter, is it not? I must say, I did not expect our meeting to include guests." Lincoln's voice cut through the air like a blade. "She is not a guest. She is with me." A ripple of tension swept across the room. Everett clasped his hands behind his back. "Yes, that seems to be the problem." Lincoln stepped forward, shielding Arya from Everett's line of sight without seeming to. "Then say what you want to say." Everett's smile deepened into something sharp. "Very well. The board is concerned about your judgment, your choices, your priorities." Lincoln's jaw tightened. "My priorities have not changed." Everett nodded as though humoring him. "Perhaps not, but your distractions have." Arya felt heat rush to her face, humiliation threatening to choke her, but Lincoln squeezed her hand, grounding her. Everett's gaze flickered to Arya. "Miss Carter, you may not realize how precarious Lincoln's position is. Public scrutiny is a delicate flame, and you are adding fuel." Lincoln's voice thundered. "Watch your tone." Everett raised his eyebrows with fake innocence. "I am merely stating facts." Ishreya inhaled slowly, summoning the courage Lincoln always seemed to believe she possessed. "If you have something to accuse me of, Mr. Shaw, say it directly." Everett blinked, surprised. "Very well. You are a liability." Lincoln stepped closer to Everett, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. "The only liability in this room is the man trying to manipulate fear." Murmurs broke out among the board members. Everett, however, held his composure with serpentine grace. "You expose the company," Everett continued coolly. "You have made us vulnerable to scrutiny. Bad press could damage the merger." Lincoln folded his arms, standing tall and resolute. "If the merger cannot withstand truth, then perhaps it should not proceed." Everett smirked. "And there it is, the emotional fragility we feared." Lincoln's eyes darkened dangerously. Arya felt electricity in the air, a tension so sharp it almost hummed. Everett moved to speak again, but this time Arya lifted her chin, stepping forward. "Mr. Shaw, with all due respect, blaming me for public reaction is convenient, but untrue. People made their own assumptions. I cannot control that." Everett studied her with new interest. "Perhaps not. But you can step away. Remove yourself from the spotlight." Arya's voice remained steady. "If Lincoln asks me to leave his side, I will go. But if the only reason you want me gone is to make him easier to control, I will not give you that satisfaction." Lincoln looked at her, stunned, admiration softening the stern lines of his face. Everett's smile faltered for the first time. Lincoln took Arya's hand again, facing the board with unshakable conviction. "I will not sacrifice someone innocent to appease corrupted expectations. If you push this issue further, you will lose me." A gasp echoed around the room. Everett's eyes narrowed. "You would resign?" "If that is what it takes to keep my integrity," Lincoln said firmly. "Yes." Everett opened his mouth, but something shifted. The board murmured among themselves, unease growing. Some nodded subtly, others avoided Everett's gaze. Lincoln had won the moment. Everett stepped back, his composure cracking for only a heartbeat before he recovered. "This discussion is unfinished," Lincoln replied. "No, it is concluded." As they exited the room, Arya's legs trembled, not from fear, this time from the intensity of what had happened. She barely made it into the elevator before Lincoln turned toward her, his eyes burning with emotion. "Arya," he whispered, stepping close. She looked up at him, her breath unsteady. "You should not have risked everything for me." "I did not risk it," he murmured, reaching for her hand. "I chose it." Her heart throbbed painfully. "Why?" He brushed her cheek tenderly, his touch light as a whisper. "Because you are worth choosing." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "Lincoln." He rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers. "I almost lost control in there," he confessed. "If he had insulted you again, I do not know what I would have done." Arya lifted her hand to his cheek, letting her thumb graze the faint stubble along his jaw. "You protected me, in front of everyone." Lincoln closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I will always protect you." The air around them thickened with emotion, tender, powerful, unrestrained. Arya's heart felt full to the point of breaking. "Lincoln," she whispered, "I am here, with you." He opened his eyes, and the depth in them made her breath tremble. "I know," he said, "and that is what gives me strength." Their lips hovered inches apart, held together by an invisible thread of longing. He did not kiss her. Not yet. But the promise of it, the inevitable gravity of it, wrapped around them like the warmth of a rising sun. When they stepped out of the elevator hand in hand, the storm outside felt harmless compared to the fire building between them. And as they walked back into the sanctuary of the penthouse, Arya knew one truth with undeniable clarity. They were no longer standing beside each other by circumstance. They were standing together by choice. Chicago woke beneath a pale winter sky, the kind that looked gentle from a distance, but still carried the sting of cold in every breath. Snow clung to ledges and window frames, softening the city's sharp angles into something almost forgiving. Inside Lincoln Halstead's penthouse, however, there was nothing forgiving about the air. It held the aftertaste of the night before, of boardroom eyes and Everett Shaw's polished cruelty, of the way power could smile while sharpening its knives. Arya stood near the window with a mug of tea warming her hands, watching the city as if the skyline could offer answers. She had barely slept. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the conference table, the whispered judgment, the thin line between being protected and being erased. Behind her, the sound of a door opening made her shoulders tense. Then she felt it, that unmistakable presence she had begun to recognize before she even turned around. Lincoln entered quietly, dressed in a dark suit, as if sleep had never dared to touch him. His hair was neat, but the shadows beneath his eyes revealed the truth. He looked composed in the way a storm looks composed when it holds itself back. He stopped a few feet away, watching her with a gaze that was both protective and unbearably tender, as if he was memorizing her in case the world tried to take her from him. "Did you rest at all?" he asked. Arya exhaled slowly. "Not really." Lincoln's jaw tightened with something that looked like regret, as if her exhaustion was a debt he carried. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You didn't do this," she said, turning to face him fully. "They did." A fragile silence stretched between them. He moved closer, but carefully, as though he had learned that closeness was not something he could demand from her, only something he could earn. His fingers brushed the edge of her sleeve, a touch light enough to be a question. "Arya," he said softly, "I need you to trust me today." Her throat tightened. "I already do." His gaze held hers, steady and intense. "Not just with your safety, with your heart." The words struck her like a sudden warmth. She stared at him, her breath catching. "Lincoln." Before she could say more, his phone vibrated. The sound snapped through the quiet like a warning. Lincoln glanced down and she saw it in his face before he spoke. Tension shifting into something sharper, more focused. He answered with a calm he did not feel. Yes. A pause. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. Say it again, he said, voice controlled. Slowly. Arya felt her pulse rise. Lincoln listened, unmoving. Then his gaze flicked toward Dante, who had appeared near the hallway, as if summoned by instinct. Bring the footage, Lincoln said into the phone. And the logs, all of it. He ended the call and looked at Arya with an expression that was both grim and determined. We have a name, he said. Arya's fingers tightened around her mug. A name for what? For who has been feeding the chaos, he replied. For who tipped the photographers? For who made sure your address surfaced? For who thought fear would push you out of my life like an inconvenience? Arya's breath caught. Who? Lincoln's voice turned low, dangerous in its restraint. Everett. A cold stillness moved through her. Even though she had felt Everett's hostility, hearing the truth spoken aloud made it real in a way that chilled her. But how do you know? She whispered. Before Lincoln could answer, Dante stepped forward. He held a small folder and a tablet, his expression steady but severe. Mr. Halstead, Dante said, we pulled building security footage from the night the envelope was delivered. The individual who left it was Everett Shaw's executive assistant. We also traced a set of calls from a private communications firm used by Everett to a paparazzi contact. That firm is the same one connected to the doxing posts. Arya's stomach dropped. Her mind flashed to the envelope's cruel sentence and the way it had tried to slice her courage in half. Lincoln moved to her without thinking. His hand cupped her elbow, grounding her as if he could shield her from the weight of truth. Arya looked up at him, eyes burning. He wanted me terrified. Yes, Lincoln said quietly, because terrified people are easy to control. She swallowed, fighting the urge to shake. And your team, Marlene, Graham. Lincoln's gaze softened, but it remained firm. They didn't know this part. Their instincts were protective, even when their methods were wrong. He paused, then added with bitter clarity, Everett wanted them to pressure me into pushing you away. He wanted distance between us because distance makes lies easier. Arya's voice trembled. Then what happens now? Lincoln inhaled slowly, as if measuring his next words against the consequences. Now, he said. We end this. A short while later, the penthouse no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a command center. Dante coordinated security. Graham arrived, tension etched across his face as he reviewed the evidence. Marlene followed, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp with the kind of fear that came from realizing she had been outplayed. Marlene glanced at Arya, and for the first time there was something like apology in her gaze. I was wrong about you, she said quietly. I thought you were a variable we had to remove. I see now you were the one thing he chose that wasn't calculated. Arya held her chin high. I never wanted to be a variable. I know, Marlene replied, voice tight. And I'm sorry. Lincoln's eyes flicked to Marlene, then to Arya, as if silently asking whether Arya could accept that apology without swallowing her own pain. Arya said nothing, but she didn't look away. That was her answer. She wasn't offering forgiveness like it was free. She was offering the possibility of it, and that was more than the world had offered her. Graham cleared his throat. Lincoln, if we take this to the board, it will detonate. Lincoln's expression was steady. It needs to. Graham hesitated. If the board fractures, the merger. Lincoln cut him off without raising his voice. I will not buy stability with someone else's dignity. Arya's breath caught at the words. Her heart did something painful and bright inside her chest. Marlene exhaled sharply. If we go public with Everett's involvement, he'll claim it's fabricated. He'll spin it. Lincoln turned toward her. Then we don't spin. We show proof. Dante held up the tablet. We have footage, time stamps, the communications firm logs. We also have the building access report showing Everett's assistant entering after hours on the same night. Lincoln nodded. Good. Uriah stepped forward, voice quiet but firm. And the overseas incident, the accusations? The room shifted. Graham and Marlene exchanged a brief glance. Lincoln looked at Arya, and something in his eyes softened into honesty so raw it made her throat tighten. I will address it directly, he said, not with half-statements, not with silence. He paused, then spoke in a lower tone meant only for her. I should have told you sooner how heavy it is. I didn't want that weight on your shoulders. Uriah held his gaze. You don't get to protect me by shutting me out. His breath hitched, and the smallest, almost broken smile touched his mouth. You're right. They moved quickly after that. Lincoln called a board meeting. Not a polite one, not a negotiated one. A final one. The conference room felt colder in daylight, its glass walls reflecting the city like a mirror that refused to blink. The board members arrived with tense expressions, and Everett Shaw arrived last, calm and immaculate, wearing confidence like a tailored coat. He looked at Arya and offered a smile that was almost friendly, almost convincing. Arya's stomach turned. Lincoln didn't offer pleasantries. He stood at the head of the table with his hands flat against the surface, posture straight, gaze unflinching. This ends today, he said. Everett's eyebrows lifted. Lincoln, you seem emotional. Again. Lincoln's voice remained level. You weaponized emotion because you thought it made me weak. Everett's smile tightened. I have no idea what you're implying. Lincoln nodded once to Dante, who stepped forward and began displaying footage on the screen. Time stamps, a familiar hallway, an assistant slipping an envelope to building staff, a sequence of calls, logs from the communications firm, confirmation of doxing ties. The room fell into a stunned silence. Everett's composure faltered for the briefest moment, then snapped back into place like a mask. This proves nothing. Assistants make mistakes. Firms take clients I can't control. Lincoln leaned forward slightly, the calm in his expression far more dangerous than anger. Your assistant didn't make a mistake, Lincoln said. She followed orders. Everett's jaw tightened. Are you accusing me of threatening a private citizen? Arya felt Lincoln's hand move behind him, subtle, reaching for her without looking. She stepped closer and let her fingers slide into his, anchoring herself to him the way he had anchored her from the beginning. Lincoln held Everett's gaze. Yes. A board member shifted uncomfortably. Another whispered something under their breath. The room had the charged stillness of a storm about to break. Everett tried to recover control. Even if this is true, you can't prove I directed it. Lincoln's eyes narrowed. I can. Graham stepped forward, his voice careful but solid. We have documentation of payment authorization routed through a shell entity linked to Mr. Shaw's private accounts. We also have a recorded call from the firm confirming the instructions came through Everett's designated channel. Everett's face paled, just slightly. His smile vanished. Marlene spoke next, her tone sharp with professional finality. I monitored narrative surges and found they aligned with Everett's internal calendar invites. He knew exactly when to ignite new rumors. Everett looked around the table, realizing the room had turned against him. This is a coup, he snapped. Lincoln's voice dropped, rich with quiet fury. No, this is consequence. The board chair cleared his throat, voice strained. Mr. Shaw, in light of this evidence, the board must vote on your immediate suspension pending investigation. Everett's eyes flickered to Lincoln, cold hatred flashing through them. You're destroying your own company for a woman. Lincoln didn't flinch. "I'm saving it from men like you," he said. The vote happened quickly. Everett was escorted out, his rage barely contained. The moment the door shut behind him, the room exhaled, but the tension didn't disappear. It simply changed shape. A board member leaned forward. "Lincoln, what about the overseas allegations? What do you plan to do?" Lincoln's hand tightened around Arya's, then he released her gently and stepped forward. "I plan to tell the truth," he said. "Not the curated version, not the convenient version." He paused, then continued with a calm that felt like steel. "I have been investigating who manipulated safety reports and buried warnings. I will cooperate fully with independent authorities. I will open our internal audits. I will disclose what I have, even if it costs me." The room stirred. "And the merger?" someone asked. Lincoln's eyes held steady. "If our future depends on silence, we don't deserve a future." Arya felt tears sting her eyes, not from fear this time, but from something fierce and bright. A man like Lincoln had been raised in a world where protection meant control, where survival meant image. Yet here he was, choosing integrity not because it was safe, but because it was right. After the meeting, the building lobby flooded with light and sound. Cameras waited beyond the doors, hungry for spectacle. Dante cleared a path. Marlene hovered with a prepared statement, but Lincoln didn't take it. Arya walked beside him, heart pounding, the city's gaze pressing down again. This time she didn't shrink. Lincoln paused before the doors, turning slightly toward her. "If you want to step back," he murmured, "I will understand." Arya lifted her chin. "I'm not stepping back." Lincoln's expression softened, something like awe crossing his face. His fingers brushed hers, then laced firmly through them. "Then we do this together," he whispered. They stepped outside into the cold. Flashbulbs exploded, voices shouted, snow drifted down like ash. Lincoln didn't flinch. He guided Arya forward with a hand at her back, not possessive, not performative, simply present. One reporter shouted, "Lincoln, was she paid?" Lincoln's voice carried clearly, firm and calm. "No." Another voice, "Who is she to you?" Lincoln looked at Arya for the briefest moment, and that look held everything he hadn't said aloud. Then he faced the cameras again. "She's Arya Carter," he said. "She's a woman who deserved dignity on a night the world wanted to strip it from her, and she deserves it now." Arya's breath caught. Her throat tightened with emotion so intense it almost stole her voice. Another reporter yelled, "Are you dating her?" Lincoln's jaw tightened, as if he refused to let strangers define what was still fragile and sacred. He answered the only way that mattered. "I'm protecting her," he said, "and I'm standing with her." Arya's heart swelled painfully. She turned her face toward him, and he felt it. His hand squeezed hers in a silent promise. Back in the penthouse, the world finally fell away. The moment the door closed, the quiet wrapped around them like warm cloth. Arya stood near the entryway, trembling slightly as adrenaline drained from her body. Lincoln approached slowly, as though he didn't want to overwhelm her. His gaze searched her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "Are you all right?" he asked. Arya laughed softly, a shaky sound. "I don't know what I am." Lincoln's eyes softened. He lifted a hand and brushed his knuckles along her cheek, lingering with reverence. "You were brave," he murmured. "You didn't owe me that." Arya's voice cracked. "I owed myself that." A silence stretched between them, thick with everything they had survived side by side. Lincoln's hand slid from her cheek to her jaw, gentle, careful. His thumb rested there as if he was holding the most fragile thing in his life. "Arya," he said, voice low, "I need to tell you something without strategy, without damage control." Her heart thudded. "Then tell me." He inhaled, as if the air itself resisted the truth. "I've lived in rooms full of people who applaud me and still leave me alone," he said. "I've had everything that looks like success and nothing that felt like peace." His gaze held hers, unguarded. "And then you walked into my life with nothing to gain from me, and you made one moment feel real." Arya's eyes glistened. "Lincoln!" He stepped closer, closing the distance until only breath remained between them. "I don't want you as a headline," he whispered. "I want you as my life." Arya trembled. "That's a dangerous thing to say to someone like me." Lincoln's brow furrowed. "Someone like you?" "A woman who has been disappointed by promises," she confessed quietly. "A woman who has learned not to trust hope." Lincoln's gaze softened, fierce and tender at once. "Then don't trust hope," he murmured. "Trust me." His thumb traced the corner of her mouth with a gentleness that made her breath hitch. Arya lifted her hand and placed it against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. It was steady, real. "I do," she whispered. Something in Lincoln's expression broke open like a restrained storm, finally allowed to rain. He leaned down, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Arya didn't move back. She rose into him instead. Their kiss was soft, aching, deliberate. Not hunger, not haste. It was gratitude turned into tenderness, fear turned into faith. Lincoln's hand slid to the back of her neck, holding her like he had been holding himself back for too long. Arya's fingers curled into his sweater, as if she needed proof he was real. When they parted, their foreheads rested together, breath mingling. "I meant what I said," Lincoln murmured. "I won't let go." Arya's voice shook. "Then don't." Lincoln pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. He reached into his pocket and drew out something small, wrapped in simple tissue. Not extravagant, not theatrical, just intentional. He opened it to reveal a delicate silver pendant on a chain, the kind that looked like quiet light rather than wealth, a small, elegant disc engraved with a single word: dignity. Arya's breath caught, tears spilling before she could stop them. "I'm not trying to buy you," Lincoln said immediately, voice raw. "I'm trying to honor you." Arya touched the pendant with trembling fingers. "Lincoln!" He fastened it around her neck with hands that weren't shaking from fear, but from emotion. His fingertips brushed the skin at the nape of her neck, sending warmth through her body. When he finished, he let his hands rest on her shoulders for a brief moment, as if he needed that contact to believe she was still there. "I want you to stay," he whispered. "Not because you're trapped, not because you're afraid, because you choose it." Arya lifted her gaze to his. "And if I choose it?" Lincoln's eyes softened. "Then we build something real. Not perfect. Real." Arya exhaled, her voice barely audible. "I choose it." Lincoln's arms wrapped around her, holding her with a tenderness that felt like triumph. Outside, Chicago remained cold and vast, but inside that embrace, Arya felt something she had never trusted enough to hold. A future that didn't begin with a promise spoken to the world. It began with a promise whispered to her heart. Chicago no longer looked like the city Arya Carter first arrived in all those years ago. The skyline had grown, shimmering with new towers that pierced the sky, and the winters had softened, warmer now, gentler, as if the world itself had decided that life had delivered enough storms to the people who once braced against them. In the heart of the city, a penthouse stood much the same as it always had. Tall windows, soft light, and a view that stretched far beyond what the eye could hold. But inside, everything had changed. A child's laughter echoed through the spacious living room. Arya stood by the kitchen island, wearing soft morning clothes, her hair tied loosely as she placed plates on the table. Two small figures hurried around the sofa, One girl with wild dark curls and delicate hazel eyes, the other a boy with Lincoln's calm expression and Arya's restless curiosity. Emma, 8 years old, Caleb, 6. The greatest proof that love not only survived the years, but flourished in them. Lincoln walked in from the hallway, still adjusting the cuff of his shirt after a morning board call, though the lines on his face held far more ease now. Time had settled into him in gentle ways. A few silver strands at his temples, a more relaxed posture, a deeper warmth in his smile, and when he looked at Arya, that warmth became something timeless. "Breakfast is ready," Arya called out. "Race you there," Caleb shouted to Emma, and the two sprinted toward the table. Lincoln approached Arya, slipping an arm around her waist and pressing a slow, affectionate kiss to her temple. "Good morning, love." She leaned into him, an easy, familiar gesture that still sent a quiet thrill through her heart. "How was the call?" "Short," he said. "These days they usually are. Turns out things get simpler when no one's trying to ruin your life." Arya laughed softly. Who would have thought? They exchanged a knowing look. A decade had passed, but some memories never faded. Everett Shaw had paid the highest price for his treachery. Once his involvement was exposed, the board removed him permanently. Legal consequences followed, and he disappeared from the public eye. Rumors said he lived abroad now, far from the world he once tried to control. Lincoln rarely spoke his name, not out of hatred, out of irrelevance. Truth had consumed lies in the end. The overseas incident, once the weapon Everett used to tarnish Lincoln's image, was reinvestigated under independent oversight. The real culprits, a group of executives who had falsified reports for profit, were prosecuted. Lincoln's own willingness to expose his company's flaws had shocked the business world, changing the standards for transparency across industries. It became the turning point of his legacy. He rebuilt his empire, but differently. Slower, cleaner, more human. Arya had stood beside him through all of it. She had never returned to her old job. Instead, she found purpose where she never expected. She founded a non-profit that provided legal, financial, and emotional support to people targeted online, victims of harassment, doxing, and public shaming. Her own story had become hope for others. People trusted her not because she was wealthy or powerful, but because she had lived the nightmare and survived it with dignity. The organization's name was the Carter Foundation. Lincoln insisted that she take full credit. She insisted that he co-chair the advisory board. The world had changed, too. After years of public pressure and advocacy groups, laws against cyber harassment strengthened. Protection for private citizens improved. Their story, once an internet frenzy, had helped shape a national conversation, though Arya still preferred to forget the days when her name had been weaponized. Now, in the quiet of their home, she felt none of that chaos, only gratitude. She set a plate in front of each child as Lincoln served himself coffee, watching his family with a tenderness that still surprised him. Emma looked up from her pancakes. "Daddy, are you coming to my recital tonight?" Lincoln feigned offense. "Am I coming, Emma? I would not miss it for anything in the world." The girl grinned widely and dove back into her breakfast. Caleb tugged at Arya's sleeve. "Mummy, can we go to the lake after school? I want to see if the ducks came back." "We can go," Arya said with a smile, brushing his hair from his forehead. "But only if you finish your homework first." He sighed dramatically, making both parents laugh. They were ordinary moments, but to Arya, they were as precious as diamonds scattered across her days. After breakfast, the children ran off to gather their bags. Lincoln approached Arya from behind, slipping his arms around her and pulling her against him. "Do you ever think," he murmured near her ear, "about how all of this almost didn't happen?" She leaned back into him, feeling his steady heartbeat. every day. He brushed a kiss along the side of her neck, soft and lingering. 10 years, he whispered, and I still feel like the luckiest man alive. She turned in his arms, cupping his cheek. Lincoln, you saved me when you didn't need to. You gave me safety, then freedom, then love. And together we built something neither of us had before. His eyes softened, luminous with emotion. You were the first person who ever saw me for who I really was. Not the headline, not the businessman, not the myth. The Dubai Maharaja, she teased lightly. He groaned with playful annoyance. I thought we buried that name. I like it, she admitted with a smile, because I know the truth behind it, the man people never got to see. He kissed her then, slow and deep, full of a love that had grown roots too deep for time to weaken. 10 years, and it still felt new. Later that evening, after school and work and obligations, their small family walked together through the soft winter dusk toward Emma's recital. Snowflakes floated around them like blessings from a gentler world. Caleb held Arya's hand, Emma held Lincoln's, and for a brief moment Arya looked at their silhouettes on the ground, the 4 figures intertwined, and felt tears prick her eyes. They were tears of joy, not sorrow, tears of a woman who had once faced the world alone with an empty stomach and a worn-out sweater, yet now walked beside a man who had offered her not rescue, but partnership. At the entrance of the school, Lincoln paused, glancing around. He leaned in close to Arya. Look, he said softly, no cameras. She breathed out a laugh, leaning into him. I think they finally got tired of us being happy. Good, he murmured, brushing a kiss to her forehead. Let them be tired. I am not. They took their seats in the auditorium, dim lights casting a warm glow over the parents gathered. Emma waved excitedly from the stage. Caleb leaned against Arya's shoulder with contentment. Lincoln reached for Arya's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, easily, 2 lives woven into one. 10 years, Arya whispered, as she rested her head on his shoulder. And a lifetime still to go, Lincoln replied. The lights dimmed. The music began, and as Arya watched their daughter on stage, as she felt Lincoln's breath warm against her hair, she knew with profound certainty that every hardship, every moment of pain, every threat and every storm had led them to this life she would not trade for anything. Their love had not just survived time, it had transformed them, completed them, defined them, and it would continue to do so, quietly and fiercely, for all the years still waiting to unfold. Every love story carries a lesson, and the journey of Lincoln and Arya leaves us with several that echo long after the final chapter closes. Their lives remind us that dignity is not something granted by circumstance, but something we reclaim when the world pushes us to our limits. It shows us that compassion can alter the course of a life, that courage often appears in the quietest moments, and that standing beside someone in their darkest hour is one of the most profound acts of love. Above all, this story teaches us that no past mistake, no public judgment, and no whispered doubt can define who we become when we choose truth over fear and connection over isolation. Arya and Lincoln began as 2 strangers sharing a single plate in a storm, and yet it was precisely that simple human act that built a bridge strong enough to withstand the weight of 10 years. Their resilience whispers something powerful to anyone listening closely. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness is the one that rewrites everything. Now, I would love to hear from you. Which moment touched you the most? What message will you carry with you after watching this story? If you stayed with us until the very end, write the word dignity in the comments so I can see how many of you journeyed through every chapter with us. If you would like to support the team that works hard to bring these stories to life, you are welcome to send a super thanks in whatever amount you feel comfortable with. Your generosity, in any form, helps us continue creating emotional and inspiring narratives. And if you cannot support us financially, sharing this story with friends or family is another meaningful way to help us grow and reach more hearts. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for feeling alongside these characters. I invite you to explore the other stories I have left linked in the cards, each one crafted with the same passion, detail, and devotion to storytelling. Until our next journey.